Lonely billionaire spends a night with a doctor and discovers he's going to be the father of twins. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. The 48th floor of Carter Industries gleamed like a fortress of steel and glass against the Manhattan skyline. Inside his corner office, Sebastian Carter stood motionless before the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights flicker to life as dusk settled over New York. His reflection stared back at him, impeccable dark suit, precisely trimmed dark hair, features that fashion magazines had dubbed aristocratic. At 35, he was at the peak of his power, and utterly alone. The quarterly reports lay scattered across his desk, each page marked with his precise annotations. The numbers were excellent, as always. Sebastian had built his empire on precision, on never letting emotion cloud his judgment. Emotion was a luxury he'd forsaken long ago, on the day he'd buried his parents. His phone buzzed. Without looking, he knew it would be his assistant reminding him about tomorrow's board meeting. There was always another meeting, another deal, another victory to chase. The endless pursuit of more had served him well, building Carter Industries into a technology giant worth billions. Yet lately, the victory champagne had started tasting like ash in his mouth. Sebastian pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to ward off the headache that had been building all day. The doctors had warned him about stress, about working 18-hour days, about the toll it was taking on his body. He'd dismissed their concerns with the same cold efficiency he applied to everything else. "Mr. Carter," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The development team is ready for the conference call with Shanghai." "Cancel it," Sebastian said, surprising himself. "Reschedule for tomorrow morning." A pause. "Sir? You've never cancelled a call before." "There's a first time for everything, isn't there?" The words came out sharper than intended. Sebastian softened his tone. "Just handle it, please." He gathered his coat and briefcase, ignoring the slight tremor in his hands. The elevator ride to the parking garage was silent, the usual crowd of employees having long since departed. His Tesla waited in its reserved spot, a sleek testament to his success. The city streets were mercifully empty as he drove, his mind drifting despite his best efforts to focus. Images flashed unbidden: his mother's garden, his father's study, the way they'd looked at each other when they thought he wasn't watching. The kind of love he'd convinced himself was a fairy tale, a weakness he couldn't afford. The first raindrop hit his windshield, followed quickly by others. Sebastian barely noticed, lost in memories he usually kept locked away. He didn't see the cab until it was almost too late. His reflexes, dulled by exhaustion, responded sluggishly. The Tesla's tires squealed against wet pavement as he swerved. But physics had other plans. The impact wasn't dramatic. No Hollywood explosion. No flying glass. Just a sickening crunch of metal meeting concrete as his car spun into a barrier. Sebastian's head snapped forward, then back. The airbag deployed with a force that knocked the breath from his lungs. Time seemed to skip. He was vaguely aware of voices, of hands helping him from the wreckage, of someone asking if he was all right. The rain had soaked through his expensive suit, but he barely felt it. The world had taken on a dreamlike quality, edges blurred and sounds muffled. "Sir, can you follow my finger?" A new voice cut through the haze, clear and authoritative. Sebastian blinked, focusing on the source. A woman in scrubs stood before him, honey-blonde hair escaping from a messy bun, green eyes sharp with professional concern. Her ID badge read, "Dr. Lucy Hayes." "I'm fine," he said automatically, trying to stand from the emergency room bed they'd insisted he occupy. The room tilted alarmingly. "You're not fine," Dr. Hayes said, firmly pressing him back down. "You have a concussion, possible whiplash, and you're showing signs of severe exhaustion. You're not going anywhere." Sebastian wasn't used to being challenged. Do you know who I am? Yes, Mr. Carter, I'm aware of who you are. She didn't look impressed. I'm also aware that your body doesn't care about your net worth. You need rest and observation. Something about her directness caught him off guard. She handled him with the same professional efficiency he prided himself on, but there was something else in her manner, a genuine concern that had nothing to do with his name or bank account. "When was the last time you slept?" she asked, checking his pupils with a penlight. "I sleep enough." "That's not what I asked." She made a note on his chart. "When was the last time you slept for more than 4 hours straight?" Sebastian opened his mouth to deflect, then stopped. In the harsh fluorescent light of the emergency room, with his carefully constructed walls crumbling from exhaustion and pain, the truth slipped out. "I don't remember." Dr. Hayes's expression softened slightly. "The human body isn't a machine, Mr. Carter. Even yours needs maintenance." "Spoken like someone who clearly works reasonable hours," he said dryly, noting the dark circles under her eyes that matched his own. To his surprise, she laughed, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to brighten the sterile room. "Touché. But at least I admit I'm not invincible." For the first time in years, Sebastian felt something crack in his carefully maintained facade. Maybe it was the concussion, or maybe it was the way she looked at him, not as a billionaire or a power broker, but simply as a human being in need of care. "Call me Sebastian," he said quietly. She glanced up from his chart, studying him, with those clear green eyes. "Only if you promise to actually rest while you're here, Sebastian." "Is that doctor's orders?" "That's Lucy's orders." She smiled, and something long dormant stirred in his chest. "The doctor in me has many more demands." As she turned to leave, Sebastian found himself watching the graceful efficiency of her movements, the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. She paused at the door. "Someone will be by to check on you every hour. Try to sleep. The world won't end if Sebastian Carter takes one night off." But as the door closed behind her, Sebastian had the unsettling feeling that his world, at least, had already shifted on its axis. In the quiet of the hospital room, with rain pattering against the window, he closed his eyes and did something he hadn't done in decades. He let himself feel vulnerable. Little did he know, this night would change everything, not just for him, but for the dedicated doctor who had finally made him pause long enough to question the walls he'd built around his heart. The hospital took on a different character. At night, the harsh fluorescent light softened somehow, creating pools of quiet illumination in the dimmed corridors. Sebastian lay awake in his private room, listening to the muted sounds of the night shift, distant conversations, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, the steady beep of monitors from neighboring rooms. His phone lay untouched on the bedside table, probably flooded with messages about his unexpected absence. For the first time in years, he let them go unanswered, the constant drive that usually kept him working until exhaustion had been replaced by something else. A strange sense of suspension, as if he'd stepped out of his own life for a moment. The door opened quietly, and Dr. Hayes, Lucy, stepped in. She'd changed from her scrubs into dark blue hospital-issued pants and a plain white coat, her honey-blonde hair now loose around her shoulders. The sight of her sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. "Still awake?" she asked, picking up his chart. "You're supposed to be resting." "I thought doctors were supposed to wake concussion patients regularly." "We are, but that assumes the patient actually sleeps between checks." She gave him a knowing look. "How's the headache?" "Present," he admitted, "but manageable." Lucy pulled up a chair, her movements betraying a hint of fatigue. "Your CT scan came back clear. No bleeding or serious trauma, but you're severely sleep-deprived, your blood pressure is elevated, and your stress levels are through the roof." She met his eyes directly. "You're heading for a breakdown if you don't make some changes. I don't have the luxury of slowing down. No one's asking. you to slow down. I'm telling you to find balance before your body forces the issue." She leaned back, studying him. "What drives someone like you so hard?" Sebastian started to give his usual deflection about market demands and responsibility to shareholders, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the lateness of the hour, or the lingering effects of the concussion, or simply the way she looked at him, as if she could see past his carefully constructed facade. "Control," he said finally. "Everything in perfect order. Every variable accounted for. No surprises, no disappointments, no—" He trailed off. "No feelings," Lucy supplied softly. He smiled without humor. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who recognizes the pattern." She pulled her legs up onto the chair, getting comfortable. "I did the same thing after my father died. Threw myself into med school, studied until I couldn't see straight. If you're always moving, always working, you don't have to feel the empty spaces." The words hit uncomfortably close to home. "How did you stop?" "I didn't at first. Then I lost a patient, a little girl, just 6 years old. I did everything right, followed every protocol, but sometimes that's not enough." Lucy's voice grew distant with memory. "I went home that night and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd really felt anything. I was so focused on being perfect, on never making mistakes, that I'd forgotten how to be human." Sebastian watched her in the dim light, struck by how her vulnerability made her seem stronger, not weaker. "What changed?" "I started small. Had dinner with friends instead of taking extra shifts. Went for walks in Central Park. Let myself feel sad or angry or happy without trying to control it." She smiled. "Turns out the world doesn't end when you let your guard down." "My parents died when I was 17, Sebastian said quietly, the words emerging from a place he usually kept locked tight. "Car accident like tonight, except they didn't walk away from it." Lucy's expression softened with understanding, but not pity. Never pity. "That's why you drive the safest car on the market, why you need to control everything." "The last thing my father said to me was that he was proud of me. He called from the road, just wanted to tell me about a meeting that went well." Sebastian's throat tightened. "I was busy studying. Told him I'd call back later." "You couldn't have known," Lucy said gently. "No, but I learned the lesson anyway. Success is the only thing you can count on. Feelings, relationships, family, they're temporary. Numbers don't lie. Markets don't die in accidents. Corporations don't leave you alone." Lucy was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's a lonely way to live." "It's efficient." "Is it? You're here because your body finally rebelled against your efficient lifestyle. When was the last time you did something just because it made you happy?" The question caught him off guard. I'm not sure I remember what that feels like." Lucy stood, her decision seemingly made. "Come with me." "What?" "Doctor's orders. Can you walk?" Sebastian got up carefully, testing his balance. The dizziness had mostly subsided. "Where are we going?" "To remember what happiness feels like." She led him through the quiet corridors, past the nurses' station where the staff seemed unsurprised to see them, up a flight of stairs and through a heavy door. They emerged onto the hospital's rooftop garden, a small oasis created for patients and staff, with benches and planters full of resilient flowers that somehow thrived in the urban environment. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and cool. The city spread out before them, a glittering tapestry of lights under clearing skies. Lucy walked to the railing, tilting her face up to catch the breeze. "I come up here sometimes after difficult cases," she said. "It helps put things in perspective. All those lights, they're all stories, all lives being lived, makes my problems feel smaller." Sebastian joined her at the railing, close enough to catch the faint scent of her shampoo mingling with the night air. "Is that why you became a doctor? To be part of their stories?" I became a doctor because I couldn't stand feeling helpless after my father's heart attack, watching the medical team work to save him. I wanted to be the person who could make a difference. She turned to face him. Why did you build your empire? To prove I could, to show that I didn't need anyone. The honesty surprised him, to build something that couldn't be taken away. And now that you have. Now. Sebastian looked out at the city, his city, in many ways. Now I'm not sure what I'm building it for. Lucy's hand found his on the railing, her touch warm and steady. Maybe that's the real reason you're here tonight. Sometimes we need to crash before we can change direction. Sebastian looked down at their joined hands, then at her face in the soft light. She was beautiful, but it was more than that. She saw him, not the billionaire, not the corporate titan, but the man beneath it all, the scared 17-year-old boy who'd never really learned how to let people in. Lucy, he said softly, and she turned to face him fully. The air between them changed, charged with possibility. This is probably a bad idea, she whispered, but she didn't pull away when he reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. Probably, he agreed, and kissed her. The world didn't end. Instead, it expanded, filled with the softness of her lips, the warmth of her body as she stepped closer, the quiet sound she made as her arms slid around his neck. For the first time in years, Sebastian Carter wasn't thinking about control or consequences or carefully managed risks. He was simply feeling. When they finally parted, Lucy's eyes were bright with something between wonder and worry. I don't usually kiss my patients. I don't usually kiss anyone. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Have dinner with me, tomorrow, when I'm officially not your patient anymore. She hesitated. Sebastian. Please. The word felt foreign on his tongue. When was the last time he'd actually asked for something, rather than simply making it happen? Lucy studied him for a long moment, then smiled. A real smile that lit up her entire face. Okay, but I choose the restaurant. Somewhere without tabloid photographers or business deals being made at every table. Deal. He kissed her again, softly, wondering at how natural it felt, how right. Later, he would look back on this moment, standing on a hospital rooftop, with a woman who challenged everything he thought he knew about himself, and recognize it as the point where his carefully ordered life began its inevitable transformation. But for now, he simply held her close, letting himself believe that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than control and empty victories. The city twinkled below them, 1,000 stories being written in lights and shadows. And on a rooftop, garden, surrounded by flowers that bloomed against all odds in the harsh urban environment, two people who had built walls around their hearts began to wonder if it was time to let them fall. Lucy stood before her bedroom mirror, second-guessing her choice of dress for the third time. The simple black cocktail dress was elegant without being flashy, professional enough for dinner, but with just enough allure to make her feel confident. Still, she couldn't shake the flutter of nerves in her stomach. This is crazy, she muttered to her reflection. Dating patients, even former patients, was precisely the kind of complication she'd always avoided. Yet here she was, preparing for dinner with Sebastian Carter, unable to forget the way he'd kissed her on the hospital rooftop. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend and fellow doctor, Rachel. Tell me you're not actually going through with this. Lucy typed back. Too late to back out now. Car's picking me up in 10. The response was immediate. Just remember, billionaires are trouble. Don't let those cheekbones fool you. But it wasn't his wealth or his looks that had gotten under Lucy's skin. It was the glimpse of vulnerability she'd seen in those quiet hospital hours. The way his carefully constructed walls had cracked just enough to reveal the man beneath. The doorbell rang precisely at 7. Lucy took a deep breath, grabbed her purse, and opened the door to find Sebastian waiting. He'd traded his usual power suits for dark jeans and a charcoal blazer that somehow made him look both more relaxed and more devastating. "You look beautiful," he said softly, his eyes taking her in with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You clean up pretty well yourself." She smiled, trying to ease the charged atmosphere between them. "So, where are you taking me?" "Actually, I thought we'd follow your suggestion." Sebastian's lips curved in a slight smile. "No photographers, no business deals, just us." The car, a discreet black Audi rather than his usual Tesla, wound through the city streets away from the typical Upper East Side haunts. To Lucy's surprise, they pulled up in front of a small Italian restaurant in the West Village, its warm lights spilling onto the cobblestone street. "Vincenzo's," Lucy's eyes widened. "How did you know about this place?" "I did my research." Sebastian guided her inside with a light touch at the small of her back. "You mentioned comfort food during our rooftop conversation. This place has the best homemade pasta in the city, according to local reviews. And he paused as the owner, an elderly Italian man, welcomed them warmly. "They have a strict no phones, no photographs policy." The restaurant was intimate, with well-worn wooden tables and vintage photos covering the walls. Their table was tucked into a corner, candlelit and private. Lucy watched Sebastian settle into his chair, noting how different he seemed from the corporate titan she'd treated in the ER. "When was the last time you ate at a place like this?" she asked, genuinely curious. Sebastian considered the question as their wine was poured. Probably college, before I took over the company." He looked around, taking in the casual atmosphere. "I forgot places like this existed. Places where no one cares about your net worth. Places that feel real." He met her eyes over the rim of his wine glass. "Like you." The conversation flowed as easily as the wine, moving from childhood memories to professional challenges to shared observations about life in the city. Lucy found herself telling him about her first year as a resident, about the patients, who had changed her perspective on medicine and life. Sebastian, in turn, opened up about the early days of building his company, the sleepless nights and impossible decisions. "The hardest part wasn't the work," he admitted, as they shared a plate of tiramisu. "It was convincing myself I didn't need anyone. That being alone made me stronger." "And now?" Lucy asked softly. Sebastian reached across the table, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Now I'm starting to think I was wrong about a lot of things." They lingered over coffee, neither wanting the evening to end. When they finally stepped outside, the night had turned cool and clear, the street quiet except for distant traffic. "Walk with me?" Sebastian asked, still holding her hand. They wandered through the village's charming streets, past brownstones and small gardens, their pace unhurried. Lucy couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so present, so aware of every moment. "This doesn't feel real," she said, stopping to look up at him under a streetlight. "Tomorrow you'll go back to being Sebastian Carter, billionaire CEO, and I'll be Dr. Hayes with too many patients and not enough sleep. What if I don't want to go back?" His voice was low, intense. "What if, for once in my life, I want to follow my heart instead of my head?" He pulled her close, one hand cupping her face as he kissed her. This wasn't the tentative kiss from the hospital rooftop. This was deep, passionate, full of need and promise. Lucy melted into him, all her professional reservations dissolving in the heat of his touch. "Come home with me," Sebastian whispered against her lips. Every logical part of her mind screamed that this was a mistake. One night couldn't change who they were, couldn't bridge the worlds they lived in, but logic had nothing to do with the way her heart raced when he looked at her, or how right it felt when he held her. "Yes," she breathed. His penthouse was exactly what she'd expected. Sleek, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the city. But Lucy barely noticed the luxury surrounding them. All she could focus on was Sebastian's hands sliding over her skin, his mouth trailing kisses down her neck, the way he whispered her name like a prayer. They made love with an intensity that surprised them both. Sebastian, who had spent years maintaining perfect control, let himself get lost in her. Lucy, who had always kept her heart carefully guarded, found herself opening completely to him. In the darkness, they discovered each other with wonder and growing need, their bodies speaking truths their words couldn't express. Later, as they lay tangled in his silk sheets, Lucy traced lazy patterns on his chest. "I should go." "Stay," Sebastian murmured, pulling her closer. "Please." She did, falling asleep in his arms as the city lights twinkled beyond the windows. For those precious hours, they were just Sebastian and Lucy, not the billionaire and the doctor, not two people from different worlds, but simply a man and a woman who had found something unexpected and beautiful in each other. Dawn found them still entwined, the early light painting the room in soft gold. Lucy woke first, watching Sebastian sleep. He looked younger, peaceful, the hard edges of his public persona softened by vulnerability. She slipped out of bed quietly, gathered her clothes, and left before he woke. On the elevator ride down, she told herself it was better this way. They had shared something magical, but magic didn't last in the real world. Better to keep it as a perfect memory than watch it fade in the harsh light of day. She didn't know that as she stepped onto the morning streets of Manhattan, her life had already changed in ways she couldn't imagine. In her body, two tiny sparks of life had taken hold, a twist of fate that would force both her and Sebastian to confront everything they thought they knew about love, family, and what truly matters in life. But that revelation was still weeks away. For now, Lucy walked home in the sunrise, her heart full of memories she thought would have to last a lifetime. And in his penthouse high above the city, Sebastian woke to find her gone, feeling for the first time in years the sharp ache of loss, and the dawning realization that his carefully controlled world would never be the same. Weeks had passed since that night, and Sebastian's office on the 48th floor felt more like a fortress than ever. He stood at his usual spot by the windows, but his reflection showed subtle changes, a certain restlessness in his stance, a shadow in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "The board is waiting, Mr. Carter." His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Sebastian straightened his tie, a gesture he'd performed countless times, yet today his fingers lingered on the silk. It was the same tie he'd worn that night at Vincenzo's. He'd found himself wearing it more often lately, a private reminder of a memory he couldn't quite shake. The boardroom fell silent as he entered. 12 faces turned toward him, expectant, each representing billions in investments and decades of corporate power. Sebastian took his place at the head of the table, spreading his papers with practiced precision. "Gentlemen, ladies, let's discuss the Morrison acquisition." He moved through the presentation with his usual authority, but part of his mind kept drifting to other meetings, hospital checkups, a candlelit dinner, whispered conversations in the dark. He'd tried calling Lucy in those first days after she'd left, but her polite professional response had been clear. Their night together was just that, one perfect night, best left as a memory. Mr. Carter, one of the board members, Alexandra Winter, sharp-eyed and shrewd, was watching him closely. "You seem distracted today." "Not at all." Sebastian clicked to the next slide. "As I was saying, the Asian markets show considerable potential for expansion Across town, in a small examination room at Mount Sinai Hospital, Lucy stared at the ultrasound screen in disbelief. Dr. Rachel Bennett, her best friend and the hospital's top obstetrician, moved the wand slowly across Lucy's abdomen. "Well," Rachel said, her professional tone barely masking her concern, "you're definitely pregnant," and she adjusted the angle slightly. "Those are two distinct heartbeats. Twins, Lucy." Lucy couldn't take her eyes off the screen, where two tiny, fluttering hearts pulsed with impossible strength. "How far along?" "Based on the measurements, about 8 weeks. Rachel set down the wand and turned to face her friend. "Which means the night with Sebastian." Lucy's hand drifted to her still flat stomach. "I was on birth control. The chances of this happening were astronomical." Rachel's expression softened. "Sometimes the universe has other plans. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Lucy closed her eyes, remembering Sebastian's face in the candlelight at Vincenzo's, the way he'd looked at her as if she were something precious and terrifying all at once. "I have to tell him. The billionaire who's been plastered all over the business news lately, the one who just announced a hostile takeover of his biggest competitor." Rachel handed Lucy a tissue. "Are you sure that's wise? He has a right to know." Lucy sat up, adjusting her clothes. "And these babies deserve a chance to know their father, even if—" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Back at Carter Industries, Sebastian was ending his board meeting when his phone buzzed. With an unfamiliar number, he nearly declined it, but something made him step out into the hallway to answer. "Sebastian Carter." "Sebastian?" Lucy's voice, slightly breathless, sent an immediate jolt through his system. We need to talk. Can you meet me?" He checked his watch automatically. "I have back-to-back meetings until—" "It's important." There was something in her tone that made him pause. "Please." The word echoed in his memory, him saying it on the hospital rooftop, asking her to dinner. Everything had changed that night. Somehow, he knew everything was about to change again. "Where?" "The hospital rooftop garden, where we first—" She took a shaky breath. "Can you come now?" Sebastian looked through the boardroom's glass walls, where his executives were already gathering for the next meeting. For the first time in his career, the empire he'd built felt suddenly less important than the tremor in Lucy's voice. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He strode back into the boardroom, where discussions about market strategies were already underway. "Meeting's adjourned. We'll reconvene tomorrow." "But sir, the Morrison deal can wait." Sebastian gathered his things, ignoring the shocked looks from his team. "Some things are more important." The drive to the hospital was a blur of city, streets and racing thoughts. He'd spent weeks trying to forget Lucy Hayes, trying to convince himself that their night together had been a momentary lapse in judgment. But every decision he'd made since then had felt hollow, every victory tasteless. The hospital looked different in daylight, less mysterious than that fateful night. Sebastian took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding with more than just exertion. When he pushed open the door to the roof, Lucy was already there. She stood at the railing where they'd first kissed, her white coat billowing slightly in the breeze. When she turned to face him, Sebastian felt the same punch of attraction, the same overwhelming urge to pull her close. But there was something different about her. A tension in her shoulders, a gravity in her eyes that made him stop short. "Lucy?" His voice was softer than he'd intended. "What's wrong?" She met his gaze directly, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm pregnant, Sebastian, with twins." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Sebastian gripped the railing, his knuckles turning white. "Twins?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Lucy nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. 8 weeks. I just found out today. Her voice caught. "I know this isn't what either of us planned. I know you have your life, your company, your... Are you sure? He cut her off, his mind racing. About the timing? Yes. A flash of hurt crossed her face. There hasn't been anyone else. Sebastian ran a hand through his hair, his carefully maintained composure crumbling. I need to sit down. They found a bench among the planters, the same resilient flowers still blooming, despite the city's harsh environment. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications and unspoken fears. I don't expect anything from you, Lucy said finally. I thought you had a right to know. These babies are part of you too. Sebastian stared at his hands, remembering how they'd trembled that night in the ER, how steady they'd felt, when he'd held Lucy close. Now they shook again, but for an entirely different reason. Babies, he repeated, the plural form making it suddenly terrifyingly real. 2 of them. I understand if you don't want... Stop! He turned to face her, his expression intense. Don't finish that sentence, just give me a moment to process this. Lucy fell silent, watching him struggle with the news that had upended her own world hours before. In the afternoon sun, she could see every emotion crossing his face. Shock, fear, confusion, and something else, something that looked almost like wonder. Finally, Sebastian spoke, his voice rough with emotion. I never thought I'd be a father. After my parents died, I convinced myself I didn't want a family, that I couldn't risk loving people who could be taken away. Sebastian. No, but when I'm with you, he continued, all those carefully constructed reasons start to fall apart. You make me question everything I thought I knew about myself. He reached for her hand, and Lucy let him take it, feeling the slight tremor in his fingers. I can't promise I'll be good at this, he said quietly. I don't know the first thing about being a father, but I do know that walking away from you, from our children, isn't an option. Lucy's eyes filled with tears. I'm scared too, she admitted. This changes everything. Yes, Sebastian agreed, squeezing her hand. It does. They sat together on that rooftop bench, surrounded by stubborn flowers and city sounds, both trying to grasp the magnitude of what lay ahead. Neither of them noticed the dark clouds gathering on the horizon, promising a storm that would test everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and what it means to be a family. Sebastian sat in his home office at midnight, surrounded by the soft glow of multiple screens displaying market data and acquisition reports, but for once his attention wasn't on the numbers. Instead, he stared at a small black and white ultrasound image on his phone. 2 tiny shapes, 2 beating hearts that had completely disrupted his carefully ordered universe. His finger hovered over the call button next to Lucy's name. It had been 3 days since the rooftop revelation, and they'd exchanged only brief text messages since then. Each time he'd started to reach out, some crisis at work had demanded his attention. The Morrison deal was falling apart, shareholders were nervous, and his competitors were circling like sharks, scenting blood in the water. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Carter, sorry to disturb you so late, but the Tokyo office is demanding an immediate response to their proposal. Sebastian glanced at the time, nearly 1 a.m. Lucy would be asleep by now, probably exhausted after her hospital shift. He closed the ultrasound image with a mixture of guilt and frustration. Put them through to my office line. Across town, Lucy sat curled in her apartment's window seat, watching the city lights flicker through a light drizzle. Her hand rested on her stomach, where morning sickness had finally begun to ease. Rachel's words from earlier that day echoed in her mind. You need to start thinking practically, her friend had insisted over lunch. What's your plan? Are you going to keep working? Where will you live? Have you discussed any of this with him? The truth was, she and Sebastian had barely discussed anything. He'd been supportive in theory, immediately offering financial assistance and promising to be involved. But in practice, he seemed to be handling the situation like another business transaction, sending his personal assistant to deliver prenatal vitamins and scheduling brief check-in calls between meetings. Her phone chimed with a text from Sebastian. "Sorry, unexpected crisis with Tokyo office. Can we meet for breakfast tomorrow, 7 a.m. at the Grove?" Lucy typed back, "I have early rounds. Lunch instead?" The response came quickly. "Board meeting. At noon. Early dinner. I can clear my schedule after 6. She stared at the message, feeling the distance between their worlds stretch wider. Before she could respond, another text appeared. "I want to do this right, Lucy. I just need time to arrange things." The next morning, Sebastian strode into the offices of Carter Industries, his mind still on Lucy's terse reply. "Take all the time you need." He could hear the disappointment behind those words, but surely she understood that he couldn't just abandon his responsibilities overnight. "Mr. Carter?" His assistant hurried to keep up with his pace. "Ms. Winter from the board is waiting in your office. She says it's urgent." Alexandra Winter stood at his office window, her reflection sharp and predatory in the glass. She turned as Sebastian entered, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Alexandra, what brings you here so early?" "Concern, Sebastian." She gestured to a tablet on his desk. "Care to explain why you've been selling off significant portions of your personal shares in Carter Industries?" Sebastian kept his expression neutral. He'd been liquidating assets quietly, preparing to set up trusts for the twins and ensure Lucy would be taken care of, regardless of what happened between them. "I'm diversifying my portfolio. Standard practice." "Nothing about your behavior lately has been standard." Alexandra's voice hardened. "Emergency board meetings, missed calls with major investors, distracted presentations. The Morrison deal is hanging by a thread, and rumors are starting to circulate. My personal investments are not the board's concern. They are when they affect shareholder confidence." She stepped closer. "We've worked too hard to build this company, Sebastian. I won't watch you destroy it over whatever or whoever has captured your attention lately." The threat in her tone was clear. Sebastian felt a familiar anger rise, the kind that had fueled his rise to power. "Are you finished?" "For now." Alexandra moved to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Sebastian, you might want to tell your new friend Dr. Hayes to be more discreet about her condition. Hospital gossip travels fast in certain circles." The door closed. Behind her, with a soft click that felt like a gunshot, Sebastian's hands clenched into fists as he realized the implications. If Alexandra knew about Lucy and the pregnancy, others would soon follow. The media would have a field day. The ruthless CEO's unexpected path to fatherhood, the doctor who captured the billionaire's heart. Lucy's life would become tabloid fodder overnight. His phone buzzed. The hospital's number. His heart jumped, but it was just his regular doctor's office confirming an appointment. Still, it reminded him of something he'd been avoiding. He needed to see Lucy, not just for a rushed dinner, but for a real conversation about their future. He pressed the intercom. "Cancel my meetings for the afternoon, all of them." "But sir," the Morrison representatives, "find a way." The drive to Mount Sinai felt longer than usual, each traffic light an exercise in patience. Sebastian rehearsed what he wanted to say, how to explain the complications they were facing. But when he reached the ER entrance, he was met by Rachel instead of Lucy. "She's in surgery," Rachel said, her expression guarded. "Emergency case, probably another 2 hours." "I'll wait." Rachel studied him for a moment. "She's having a hard time, you know. Morning sickness, double shifts, trying to figure out how to tell her department head she's pregnant with twins. She could use more than just vitamin deliveries and rescheduled dinners. The words stung, partly because they echoed his own guilty thoughts. I'm trying to protect her. From what? Life. Because that's what this is, Sebastian. Real life, with all its mess and complications. Not a business deal you can optimize. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted at the ER entrance, a trauma case arriving by ambulance. Rachel hurried away, leaving Sebastian standing in the busy hallway, feeling more out of place than ever. He found his way to the rooftop. A garden, their spot. The flowers were still blooming, stubbornly beautiful in their harsh environment. His phone buzzed constantly with crisis alerts from the office, but for once, he let them go unanswered. Instead, he pulled out the ultrasound. Image again, studying the tiny shapes that had already changed everything. He remembered his father's last words, "I'm proud of you, son," and wondered what his parents would think of him now. Would they recognize the man who had built an empire, but couldn't figure out how to bridge the gap between his world and the woman carrying his children? The door opened behind him, and he knew without turning that it was Lucy. She still wore her surgical scrubs, her hair escaping from its neat bun, exhaustion evident in her stance. Rachel said, "You've been waiting." She moved to stand beside him at the railing. "Another crisis?" "Yes," Sebastian said quietly, "but not the kind I usually deal with." He turned to face her fully. "I'm doing this all wrong, aren't I?" Lucy's expression softened slightly. "You're doing what you know how to do. Control, manage, arrange. But Sebastian..." She placed her hand over his where it gripped the railing. "These babies don't need a CEO. They need a father. I don't need a benefactor. I need a partner," he finished. "I know. I want to be that, Lucy. I just don't know how." "Neither do I." She smiled tiredly. "Maybe that's something we could figure out together, if you can make time between Tokyo calls and board meetings." The hint of hurt in her voice made him wince. "Alexandra Winter knows about the pregnancy. Soon everyone will know." "Is that why you're here? Damage control?" "No." Sebastian caught her hand as she started to pull away. "I'm here because I've spent 3 days trying to solve this like a business problem, and all I've managed to do is miss you, miss opportunities to be part of this. I don't want to be the kind of father who sends his assistant with vitamins. I want..." He struggled to find the right words. "I want to do better than that." Lucy studied him for a long moment, then slowly pulled something from her pocket, another ultrasound image, newer than the one he carried. "They've grown," she said softly. "Even in just a few days. The doctor says they're developing perfectly." Sebastian stared at the image, at the clearer shapes of his children. Something tight in his chest began to loosen. "Move in with me." "What?" "Not as a business arrangement, not for appearances, but because I want to be there for every moment. Every doctor's appointment, every midnight craving, everything." He cupped her face gently. "I want to figure out how to be a father, and I can't do that from across town between meetings." Lucy leaned into his touch, but her practical nature asserted itself. "Sebastian, our lives are completely different. My work, my independence. Keep them. Keep your apartment if you want a backup plan. I know I haven't earned your trust yet, but give me a chance to try." His thumb brushed her cheek. "Give us a chance to build something real." A nurse burst through the roof door before Lucy could respond. "Dr. Hayes, your patient from surgery. There are complications." Lucy straightened immediately, doctor mode engaging, but she paused long enough to press the ultrasound image into Sebastian's hand. "Come by my place tonight. Late, after my shift. We'll talk more." He watched her hurry away, the image of their growing children warm in his hand. His phone buzzed again. Probably Alexandra, or the Tokyo office, or any of the dozen crises waiting for his attention. But for the first time in his career, Sebastian Carter let the business world wait. Instead, he stood in the rooftop garden, surrounded by improbable flowers and city sounds, planning how to rebuild his life around something more precious than any corporate empire. The chance to become the kind of man his children would be proud to call father. Billionaire's baby scandal. Carter Industries CEO expecting twins with ER doctor. Lucy stared at the headline splashed across her tablet screen, her breakfast sitting untouched beside her in Sebastian's sleek penthouse kitchen. The article below was filled with speculation about their relationship, complete with grainy photos of her entering and leaving the hospital. Someone had even dug up her medical school graduation picture. "Don't read that trash," Sebastian said, coming up behind her and gently taking the tablet away. He was already dressed for the office in an impeccable charcoal suit, but his expression was soft as he kissed her temple. "Hard not to when my patients keep bringing it up." Lucy leaned back against him, seeking comfort. "Yesterday, a teenager asked for my autograph during her checkup. An autograph, Sebastian. I'm a doctor, not a celebrity." It had been 2 weeks since she'd agreed to move in with him, 2 weeks of trying to blend their vastly different lives. The media explosion had started 3 days ago, after someone at the hospital leaked her pregnancy to the press. "I can have the legal team deal with this," Sebastian offered, his protective instincts kicking in. "Issue cease and desist orders, demand retractions, and make it an even bigger story?" Lucy shook her head. "Besides, I knew what I was getting into, sort of." She attempted a smile, "though I didn't expect to be called a gold-digging baby trap by complete strangers on the internet." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "Who said that? You'll what? By every tabloid in New York, have my social media scrubbed." Lucy stood, straightening her scrubs. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. Everything in your world gets solved. With money and power. I'm trying to protect you. I know." She softened, touching his face. "But you can't shield me from everything. We need to learn to handle this together, as equals." Before Sebastian could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. The Morrison deal was threatening to collapse entirely, and the board was calling an emergency meeting. He looked at Lucy apologetically. "Go," she said, understanding in her eyes. "Save your empire. I have a 12-hour shift anyway." "Dinner tonight?" He caught her hand. "I'll cook." Lucy raised an eyebrow. "You cook?" "I'm learning." He smiled, the rare, genuine smile that still made her heart skip, part of becoming a better man. The elevator ride to the lobby was tense. Sebastian's security team had implemented new protocols since the media frenzy began, but photographers still clustered outside the building. Lucy squared her shoulders as the doors opened. "Dr. Hayes, is it true you're carrying twins?" "How long have you been dating Sebastian Carter? Did you plan this pregnancy to trap him?" The questions came rapid-fire as Lucy made her way to the waiting car, Sebastian's security team forming a barrier around her. She kept her head high, remembering her mother's words. "Grace under pressure is the mark of true strength." At the hospital, Lucy found relative sanctuary in her work. Her colleagues had mostly adjusted to her new status, though she still caught whispers and curious glances. Rachel remained her steadfast ally, fiercely protecting her privacy and running interference with nosy staff members. "Your 10 o'clock is here," Rachel said, handing Lucy a patient file. "And fair warning, she's already asked if you're really dating the hot billionaire." Lucy sighed. "Wonderful. Maybe I should start wearing a sign. Yes, those are my babies. No, it wasn't planned. Yes, he's really the father. No further questions." "Or you could just embrace it," Rachel grinned. "Become New York's most glamorous doctor. Get your own reality show." "Don't even joke about that." Lucy shuddered, then winced as one of the twins kicked particularly hard. They're active today. Rachel's expression softened. How are you really doing? And I don't mean with the media circus. Lucy considered the question as they walked to her next patient. It's complicated. Sebastian is trying so hard. He's reading every pregnancy book he can find, hired a chef to prepare perfectly balanced meals, even started talking to my stomach in different languages because some study suggested it helps with cognitive development. Sounds terrible, Rachel teased. A handsome billionaire who's devoted to you and your babies. That's just it. Lucy paused outside the exam room. He's approaching this like one of his business projects. Research, optimize, control variables. But sometimes I catch him looking terrified, like he's realizing no amount of money or planning can guarantee everything will be okay. Meanwhile, Sebastian sat in his boardroom, half listening to arguments about the Morrison acquisition. His mind kept drifting to the morning's headlines, to Lucy's brave face as she walked through the gauntlet of reporters. Mr. Carter? Alexandra Winter's sharp voice cut through his thoughts. Perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on the situation. Sebastian straightened, noting the expectant faces around the table. The Morrison deal isn't our only concern. Our stock has dropped 12 points since the news broke. The news? Of your personal situation? Alexandra's smile was razor thin. Funny how an unplanned pregnancy can spook investors. Careful, Alexandra. Sebastian's voice carried a quiet warning. My personal life is not up for discussion. It is when it affects shareholder value. The board has concerns about your focus, your judgment. Moving in with a woman you barely know, preparing to be a father to twins. It's a lot of change very quickly. My judgment is fine. Sebastian stood, his authority filling the room. And if anyone has leaked information about Dr. Hayes to the press, they should know that I will find out, and the consequences will be severe. The threat hung in the air as he left the boardroom. In the privacy of his office, Sebastian pulled out his phone, looking at the latest ultrasound image. Now his phone's background. The twins were clearly visible now, their features becoming distinct. According to Lucy's doctor, they were both girls. His father's voice echoed in his memory. Success isn't just about building wealth, son. It's about building a life worth living. A text from Lucy pulled him from his thoughts. Baby. I just did something that felt like a somersault. Baby B followed suit. I think we're raising gymnasts. Sebastian smiled, typing back, like their mother keeping me on my toes. Speaking of keeping you on your toes, Lucy's response came quickly. Your chef quit. Something about me crying. Over his perfectly balanced meals and demanding pizza at midnight. I'll handle it. No, we'll handle it. Come home early. We'll cook together. Actually cook, not just order from your 5-star restaurant contacts. I'll teach you how normal people make dinner. Sebastian looked at his schedule. Meetings until 9. Calls with international investors, a stack of urgent contracts to review. Then he thought about Lucy in their kitchen, pregnancy cravings and all, offering him a chance to step into her world for a change. On my way, he typed, already reaching for his coat. His assistant's shocked face as he left early was worth it. In the car, Sebastian made one call. Not to his legal team about the press, not to his PR firm about damage control, but to Vincenzo's, the little Italian restaurant from their first date. Vincenzo, Sebastian Carter, remember that tiramisu Lucy loved, and the way you showed me how real Italian food should taste. I need a favor. An hour later, Lucy walked into the penthouse to find Sebastian in old jeans and a soft sweater, the kitchen counter covered in ingredients. Vincenzo himself stood there, wooden spoon in hand, like a conductor's baton. Ah, bella Lucy. The old Italian beamed. Your man wants to learn to cook for you and the bambinas. We start with the basics. My grandmother's recipe for pasta alla Norma. Simple, yes, but made with love. Lucy's eyes filled with tears, damn hormones, as she watched Sebastian Carter, terror of Wall Street, awkwardly learning to chop eggplant under Vincenzo's patient instruction. "You did this for me?" she asked softly. Sebastian looked up, a smudge of flour on his cheek. "I'm trying to learn that not everything needs to be perfect. Sometimes messy and real is better." "Si, si," Vincenzo approved. "Now, Sebastian, the sauce. You must stir with feeling. Cooking is not like business. It needs heart." Lucy joined them at the counter, slipping naturally into helping prepare the meal. Outside, the city buzzed with gossip about them, and tomorrow would bring new headlines and challenges. But here in their kitchen, with Vincenzo teaching them his grandmother's recipes and the twins doing their nightly acrobatics, they were just Sebastian and Lucy, learning to build a life together, one imperfect moment at a time. Later, as they sat on the balcony enjoying their slightly misshapen but delicious pasta, Lucy asked, "Do you regret it? All this mess, the media, the board pressure?" Sebastian pulled her closer, his hand resting on her growing belly where their daughters moved. Beneath his touch, "I regret not knowing how to do this perfectly, but you, them, this life we're building, never." A camera flash from a distant building caught their private moment. Tomorrow it would probably be in some tabloid, but for now they stayed on their balcony, wrapped in each other's arms, letting the city gossip while they focused on what really mattered, the family they were becoming, imperfections and all. "Did you know about this?" Lucy's voice was unnaturally calm as she held out her phone to Sebastian. The morning sun streamed through the penthouse windows, casting long shadows across the breakfast table they'd come to share each morning before. Their respective days began. Sebastian took the phone, his expression darkening as he read the headline, "Carter's Secret Past, Former Fiancé Speaks Out." Below was a photo of him from 5 years ago, standing beside a striking woman with raven hair and calculating eyes. They were at some charity gala, his arm around her waist, both smiling for the cameras. Victoria. The name felt like ash in his mouth. I should have known she'd surface eventually. "So it's true?" Lucy's hand unconsciously moved to protect her now prominent belly. "You were engaged." Sebastian set the phone down carefully, buying time to find the right words. "It was 5 years ago, before I became CEO. Victoria Reed was the daughter of my biggest investor at the time. And you were going to marry her. It was a business arrangement." Sebastian reached for Lucy's hand, but she pulled back. "Her father wanted to merge our companies. Marriage was part of the deal." "How romantic." Lucy stood, moving to the window. At 5 months pregnant with twins, her scrubs couldn't quite hide her growing bump. "When were you planning to tell me about this?" It didn't seem relevant. The engagement ended badly. Badly enough for her to tell the press that you're incapable of real love and using this pregnancy to secure your public image. Lucy's voice cracked slightly. "She says you have a pattern of using people for business advantage, Sebastian. That you'll do anything to protect your company's interests." Sebastian felt his carefully constructed world starting to crumble. "Lucy, please, let me explain." But Lucy was already gathering her things for work. "I have surgeries scheduled. We'll talk later." The door closed behind her with a quiet finality that hurt more than any slam could have. At Carter Industries, Sebastian found the situation deteriorating rapidly. Victoria's interview had sparked a fresh wave of speculation about his relationship with Lucy, and the stock was taking another hit. Alexandra Winter was waiting in his office, her expression grave. "The board has called an emergency meeting," she announced without preamble. "Victoria Reed's father still owns 12% of our shares. He's threatening to sell if we don't address this situation." "What situation?" Sebastian's voice was dangerously quiet. My personal life is not up for discussion. It is when your ex-fiancé is painting you as an emotionally manipulative sociopath who uses people for business advantage. Alexandra perched on the edge of his desk. Maybe it's time to consider damage control. Meaning, a quick, quiet settlement. With Dr. Hayes, generous child support, shared custody arrangements, all very civilized. Show the world you're taking responsibility without letting this personal entanglement interfere with business. Sebastian's hands clenched into fists. Get out. Sebastian, now. Alone in his office, Sebastian stared at the city sprawling below. 5 years ago, ending things with Victoria had seemed like a simple business decision. She'd threatened revenge, of course, but he'd been too focused on building his empire to care. Now her words in the press twisted like knives, not because they hurt him, but because he could imagine Lucy reading them, wondering if there was truth behind the venom. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. She's not okay. Fix this. At Mount Sinai, Lucy tried to lose herself in work, but Victoria's words kept echoing in her mind. During a brief break, she found herself in the hospital chapel, seeking quiet rather than prayer. I thought I'd find you here. Rachel's voice was gentle as she sat beside her friend. You always come here to think. I'm being ridiculous, Lucy said, wiping her eyes, letting some tabloid interview affect me like this. You're pregnant with twins, hormonal, and just found out your boyfriend has a shadowy past with a woman who looks like she eats men for breakfast. I'd say you're entitled to some feelings about that. Lucy managed a weak laugh. When you put it that way. Her expression sobered. What if she's right, Rachel? What if this is all just some elaborate business strategy? Get the pregnant doctor on board, present a perfect family image to shareholders. Stop. Rachel took Lucy's hands firmly. I've seen how Sebastian looks at you, how he talks to those babies every night. No one's that good an actor. But he never told me about her, about any of it. How many other secrets is he keeping? Before Rachel could respond, Lucy's pager buzzed. An emergency in the ER. She straightened, doctor mode engaging despite her personal turmoil. The emergency turned out to be a multi-car accident, requiring hours of surgery. Lucy worked mechanically, her trained hands steady even as her mind churned. It wasn't until she was scrubbing out that she noticed the missed calls and texts from Sebastian. The last one simply read, "Please come home. I need to tell you everything." It was past midnight when Lucy finally entered the penthouse. Sebastian sat in the darkness of their living room, illuminated only by the city lights beyond the windows. He looked older somehow, worn down in a way she'd never seen before. I grew up with Victoria, he said without preamble. Our fathers were business partners. Everyone assumed we'd eventually marry, merge the companies, create a dynasty. He laughed bitterly. I never questioned it. Love wasn't part of the equation. Lucy sat across from him, waiting. The engagement was announced. Deals were made. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Then I discovered she and her father were orchestrating a hostile takeover. They'd been selling company secrets to competitors, weakening our position from the inside. Sebastian's voice hardened. I ended it, publicly. Victoria swore she'd destroy me, but by then I'd learned to wall off any emotion that might make me vulnerable. Until me, Lucy said softly. Until you. Sebastian finally looked at her, his eyes raw with feeling. You crashed through every wall I'd built, Lucy. Made me feel things I thought I'd buried forever. And it terrifies me. What does? Loving you. The words hung in the air between them. Loving our daughters, having so much to lose. Lucy felt the twins move, responding to her racing heart. So you kept Victoria a secret because I'm ashamed. Sebastian moved to kneel before her, taking her hands. Not of ending the engagement, but of who I was then. The man who could treat marriage like a business deal, who thought love was a weakness to be avoided. I didn't want you to know that version of me. I need to know all of you, Lucy said, tears spilling over. The good and the bad, that's what partners do. I know that now. Sebastian's thumbs brushed away her tears. Give me a chance to prove it. Ask me anything, about Victoria, about my past, about who I used to be. No more secrets. Lucy studied him in the dim light, this powerful man brought low by the fear of losing her. One of the twins kicked particularly hard, as if urging her to decide. Start at the beginning, she said finally. Tell me everything. So he did. Through the dark hours of the night, Sebastian Carter finally let down every remaining wall. He told Lucy about his lonely childhood, about learning to equate wealth with worth, about the years of calculated decisions that had built his empire at the cost of his humanity. And as dawn began to paint the sky in soft gold, Lucy made her own confession. I'm scared too, she whispered. Scared of losing myself in your world, of becoming just Sebastian Carter's pregnant girlfriend instead of Dr. Hayes. Scared that Victoria's right, and I'm not equipped for any of this. Sebastian gathered her close, his hands spanning her belly, where their daughters grew. You are the strongest person I know, he said fiercely. You save lives every day. You've saved mine, even if you don't know it yet. How? By showing me what really matters, not stock prices or board meetings or public image, but this, us, our family. Lucy leaned into him, exhausted but somehow lighter. Victoria's not going to stop, is she? No. Sebastian's voice was grim. This is just her opening move, but this time I'm not fighting alone. As if in agreement, both twins kicked simultaneously, making their parents laugh despite everything. Outside, the city was waking up, probably to new headlines and fresh scandals. But in their penthouse sanctuary, Sebastian and Lucy had found something Victoria had never understood, the kind of love that made you stronger, not weaker. They fell asleep as the sun rose, still tangled together on the couch, their daughters safe between them. The storm wasn't over. Victoria's revenge was just beginning, and the challenges to their relationship would only grow. But they faced it together now. No more walls, no more secrets, just two people learning that real love was worth any battle. The hospital boardroom felt impossibly small as Lucy faced the stern faces of Mount Sinai's administrative board. At 6 months pregnant with twins, her surgical scrubs stretched tight across her belly, she forced herself to stand tall, despite her exhaustion. Dr. Hayes, the chief of surgery, began. We've always valued your contributions to this hospital. Your surgical record is exemplary. However, recent publicity has become a concern. Lucy's heart sank as he slid a glossy magazine across the table. On the cover was a photo of her leaving the hospital, clearly taken with a long-range lens. The headline screamed, Pregnant Doctor's Questionable Past, What Sebastian Carter Doesn't Know. This article, another board member spoke up, suggests you've had inappropriate relationships with other wealthy patients, that you specifically targeted Mr. Carter when he was admitted to the ER. That's absurd. Lucy's voice shook with anger. We understand these allegations are probably false, the chief interrupted, but the publicity is affecting patient confidence. People are requesting transfers to other doctors. Some are even switching hospitals entirely. Lucy recognized the careful wording, the political dance. What exactly are you saying? We're suggesting a temporary leave of absence, paid, of course, until this situation resolves itself. Outside the boardroom, Lucy leaned against a wall, fighting back tears. Her phone buzzed, a text from Sebastian. Board meeting just ended. Victoria's father made his move. Call me. At Carter Industries, Sebastian paced his office like a caged lion. The board meeting had been brutal. Victoria's father, Charles Reed, had presented a motion to have Sebastian temporarily step down as CEO, citing personal distractions and questionable judgment. His phone rang, Lucy's ringtone. "Hey, are you okay?" Her voice was tight with suppressed emotion. "They want me to take a leave of absence. There's a magazine article—" "I know." Sebastian's free hand clenched into a fist. "Victoria's work. She's coordinating with her father. They're trying to destroy both our careers." "Sebastian, these allegations, they're saying I have a history of seducing wealthy patients, that I'm some kind of—" "Stop!" His voice was fierce with protection. "No one who knows you would believe that for a second." A knock at his door interrupted them. Alexandra Winter entered without waiting for permission, her expression grave. "The press is downstairs. Someone leaked details about the board meeting. They're saying you're being forced out." Sebastian covered the phone. "Handle it. No comment on anything." But Lucy had heard. "This is my fault if I hadn't—" "Don't." Sebastian's voice softened. "Come home, please. We need to talk about this together." The drive home was a gauntlet of photographers and reporters. Sebastian's security team had to clear a path for Lucy to enter the building. In the elevator, she caught her reflection in the mirrored walls, pale, tired, her hand protectively cradling her belly. Sebastian was waiting in the penthouse, his tie loosened, jacket discarded. The moment he saw her, he crossed the room in long strides and pulled her into his arms. "I'm so sorry," he murmured into her hair. "I should have known Victoria would—" "Strike at you first." Lucy melted into his embrace, letting herself be held. "What are we going to do?" Before Sebastian could answer, his phone buzzed with an incoming email. His expression darkened as he read it. "What is it?" "Victoria." He handed her the phone. "She wants to meet. Just her and me at our old restaurant." Lucy read the message, her heart clenching at the familiar tone, the subtle intimacy of shared history. "Are you going?" "Not without you." "Sebastian." "No, more secrets, remember?" He cupped her face in his hands. "We face this together." The restaurant was one of Manhattan's most exclusive, the kind of place where deals worth billions were made over perfect wine pairings. Victoria sat at a corner table, elegant in black, her red lips curving in a predatory smile as Sebastian and Lucy approached. "This was supposed to be a private conversation," she purred, eyeing Lucy's pregnant form with calculated disdain. "Anything you have to say to me, you can say to both of us." Sebastian held Lucy's chair, his hand lingering supportively on her shoulder. Victoria's smile never wavered. "How domestic you've become, the great Sebastian Carter, brought low by baby drama and public scandal." She sipped her wine. "It doesn't have to be this way, you know. We could end this quickly." "What do you want, Victoria?" "What I've always wanted." Her eyes glittered. "The company, your shares, your voting rights, everything. Sign it all over to me and my father, and this goes away. The press, the allegations about your doctors, professional ethics, all of it." Lucy felt Sebastian tense beside her. "And if he refuses?" Victoria's gaze shifted to Lucy, sharp as a blade. "Then I destroy everything. His reputation, his company, your career. Those babies you're carrying, they'll grow up reading about how their mother seduced their father for money, how their father's empire crumbled because of a cheap affair with an opportunistic doctor." "Enough!" Sebastian's voice cut through the air like steel. "You want to destroy me? Fine. But leave Lucy and our daughters out of this." "Oh, darling." Victoria leaned forward. "Don't you understand? She is how I destroy you. Look at you, the man who swore love was weakness, who broke our engagement without a second thought because it was good business. Now you're ready to sacrifice everything for a pregnant doctor you barely know." "You're right," Sebastian's quiet words surprised both women. "I am different now. Because Lucy showed me what real love looks like. Not business arrangements or power plays, but partnership, trust, the kind of love that makes you stronger, not weaker. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. You're a fool. No, Lucy spoke up, finding her voice. He's a father, a partner, a man learning to be more than his bank account or his company's stock price. She met Victoria's cold gaze steadily. And if you want to destroy that, you'll have to go through both of us. Sebastian reached for Lucy's hand under the table, squeezing it gently. We're done here. Whatever you're planning, Victoria, remember, I'm not the same man you knew. I have something worth fighting for now. They stood together, leaving Victoria with her perfect wine and her bitter plans. Outside, the city air felt cleaner somehow, despite the ever-present photographers trying to capture their exit. Did we just make things worse? Lucy asked, as their car pulled away. Sebastian pulled her close, his hand finding its familiar place on her belly where their daughters moved beneath his touch. Probably. But I meant what I said. I'm not the same man Victoria knew. She's fighting the old Sebastian, the one who only cared about business. She doesn't understand what I'm willing to do to protect our family. Lucy turned to study his profile in the passing city lights. And what is that? Whatever it takes. He met her gaze, his expression fierce with love and determination. I built Carter Industries from nothing once. I can do it again if I have to. But you, our daughters, this life we're building, that's irreplaceable. One of the twins kicked particularly hard, making them both smile despite everything. In that moment, Lucy realized something Victoria would never understand. True power wasn't in destroying things, but in building them. Building trust, building family, building love strong enough to weather any storm. The next day would bring new headlines, new attacks, new challenges to face. But as they rode home through the glittering Manhattan night, Sebastian and Lucy held on to what mattered most, each other, their growing daughters, and the unshakable certainty that they had found something worth any price Victoria might try to extract. The war wasn't over. In many ways it was just beginning. But they faced it together now, stronger for every attack, more determined with every battle. Victoria might have the press, the board, and years of calculated revenge on her side, but Sebastian and Lucy had something far more powerful, a love that had transformed them both, making them better versions of themselves than either had thought possible. The morning everything changed started deceptively normal. Lucy, now 7.5 months pregnant, was reviewing patient files in the hospital's medical library. Her temporary leave had been mysteriously reversed after several board members received anonymous evidence that Victoria Reed had fabricated the allegations against her. Sebastian's influence, she suspected, though he hadn't said anything. He'd been working late every night for weeks, fighting battles she only partly understood, trying to protect both his company and their family. Her phone buzzed. Rachel calling. Turn on the financial news, now! Lucy found a television in the doctor's lounge, her heart sinking as she read the crawling headlines. Carter Industries stock in freefall. CEO Sebastian Carter, accused of securities fraud. Federal investigation pending. The story unfolded in brutal detail. Anonymous sources had provided evidence that Sebastian had been manipulating stock prices, hiding losses, and engaging in insider trading. The evidence looked damning. Emails, financial records, board meeting minutes, all pointing to years of systematic fraud. It's all lies. Sebastian's voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway, looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him. Victoria and her father spent months fabricating everything. By the time we prove it's false, the damage will be done. The company is finished. His voice was raw. The stock has lost 60% of its value since the market opened. The board is meeting in an hour to vote me out. The FBI is probably preparing search warrants as we speak. Lucy crossed to him, taking his hands. They were ice cold. "What do you need me to do?" Before he could answer, Alexandra Winter appeared behind him, her expression grave. "Sebastian, I've been trying to reach you. Charles Reed is offering a deal." "What kind of deal?" "He'll provide evidence that the fraud allegations are false, evidence he apparently had all along. In exchange, he wants controlling interest in the company. And," Alexandra hesitated, "he wants you to publicly reconcile with Victoria, says it will restore investor confidence." Lucy's hands tightened on Sebastian's. One of the twins kicked sharply, as if sensing her distress. "Get out!" Sebastian's voice was deadly quiet. "Think about this rationally," Alexandra pressed. "Your reputation, your company, everything you've built." "I said get out!" The words exploded from him with surprising force. Alexandra retreated, leaving them alone in the suddenly silent room. "Sebastian," Lucy said softly, "if this is what you need to do—" "Don't." He turned to her, his eyes fierce. "Don't even suggest it. Your company can burn to the ground." His hands framed her face. "I meant what I said to Victoria. Nothing is worth losing you and our daughters." A commotion in the hallway interrupted them. Rachel burst in, her face pale. "Lucy, it's your patient from this morning, the heart transplant. There are complications. We need you in surgery now." Lucy's doctor instincts kicked in immediately. "I'll scrub in." "You can't," Sebastian protested. "The stress, the babies." "A 23-year-old mother of 2 is dying on my table." Lucy's voice was firm. "I'm the only one who's done this particular procedure successfully. I have to try." Sebastian recognized the look in her eyes, the same determination he'd seen that first night in the ER when she'd refused to be intimidated by his name or wealth. "Be careful," he said softly. "I'll handle things with the board. I love you." Lucy kissed him quickly. "Whatever happens with Victoria and the company, remember that." The surgery was complex and grueling. Lucy stood for hours, her back aching, the twins particularly active as if protesting the strain. But her hands remained steady as she worked to save her patient's life. "Blood pressure dropping," a nurse called out. "Come on, Jenny," Lucy murmured to her patient. "Your kids need you. Fight." Finally, after what felt like eternity, the crisis passed. The transplanted heart began beating strongly, color returning to Jenny's face. Lucy stepped back, suddenly lightheaded. "Dr. Hayes?" Rachel's voice seemed to come from far away. "Lucy, you're bleeding." Lucy looked down. A small pool of red was forming at her feet. "The babies," she whispered, and the world went black. She woke to organized chaos, monitors beeping, doctors shouting orders, Rachel's face swimming into view. "Placental abruption," Rachel was saying. "We need to deliver now." "It's too early," Lucy protested weakly. "The babies are in distress. We don't have a choice." "Sebastian is on his way," Rachel squeezed her hand. "Just hold on." The next few minutes were a blur of pain and fear. Lucy, who had performed countless emergency procedures, found herself on the other side of the surgical table, terrified not for herself, but for her daughters. "Someone find Sebastian Carter," she heard Rachel shout. "Now!" Then Sebastian was there, still in his business suit, his face white with fear. "Lucy, oh God, Lucy, the board meeting doesn't matter. Nothing matters but you and our girls." His voice broke. "Please, just hold on." Lucy tried to focus on his face as the medical team rushed around them. "If anything happens to me, nothing is going to happen to you." Sebastian's grip on her hand was almost painful. "Do you hear me? I can lose everything else, but I can't lose you." The contractions were coming faster now, the pain intense. Lucy could hear the worry in Rachel's voice as she called out orders, could feel the increasing urgency in the room. "Baby A's heart rate is dropping," someone called out. "We need to move now." Rachel appeared above her. "Lucy, we're doing an emergency C-section. The babies need to come out immediately." Lucy nodded, her doctor's mind understanding the necessity, even as her mother's heart screamed that it was too soon. She looked at Sebastian, seeing in his eyes the same fear she felt. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Always." He pressed his forehead to hers. "You taught me what that word really means." Odide, as the anesthesia took hold, Lucy's last conscious thought was of that night in the ER so many months ago, when a seemingly routine patient had turned out to be the love of her life. How strange that now, in another emergency room crisis, everything hung in the balance again. The last thing she heard was Sebastian's voice, strong and sure despite his fear. "I love you, Lucy Hayes. You and our daughters are the best thing that ever happened to me. Fight for us. Please fight." Then darkness claimed her, leaving Sebastian to face the longest weight of his life, torn between his empire crumbling around him and the three lives that had become his whole world, praying he wouldn't have to choose between saving his company and saving his family. But sometimes life forces choices upon us, whether we're ready or not. And as Lucy was rushed into surgery, Sebastian Carter finally understood what his father had meant all those years ago. Success meant nothing without love to give it meaning. The NICU was eerily quiet, except for the soft beeping of monitors and the gentle whir of machines. Sebastian stood between two incubators, his hands pressed against the clear plastic, watching his daughters breathe. They were so tiny, each small enough to fit in his palm, yet fighting with a strength that amazed him. "They're doing well," Rachel said softly, coming to stand beside him. "Their vitals are strong. They're fighters, just like their mother." Sebastian's throat tightened. "How is she?" "Still unconscious, but stable. The next few hours will be critical." He nodded, unable to speak. After 36 hours of chaos, he was running on coffee and fear alone. The business empire he'd spent his life building was in shambles. Federal investigators were combing through Carter Industries' records, and the woman he loved lay unconscious 3 floors below. Yet here he stood, mesmerized by 2 tiny faces that somehow combined his features with Lucy's. "Have you named them yet?" Rachel asked. "We had chosen names, but—" Sebastian touched one of the incubators gently. "It doesn't feel right without Lucy." His phone buzzed. Alexandra again. He'd been ignoring her calls for hours, ever since. He'd walked out of the emergency board meeting the moment he'd heard about Lucy's condition. "The business world won't wait forever," Rachel observed. "Let it burn." Sebastian's voice was quiet but firm. "I'm not leaving them." "Mr. Carter?" A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Dr. Hayes is showing signs of waking up." Sebastian's heart jumped. "The babies, I'll stay with them," Rachel promised. "Go." He took the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator, needing to move, to do something. Lucy's private room was dim and quiet, the monitors showing stronger vital signs than before. As he watched, her eyelids fluttered. Lucy. He took her, and, still cool but no longer ice-cold, "Can you hear me?" Her eyes opened slowly, focusing on his face with effort. "The babies, they're perfect." His voice cracked. "Small but strong, fighting hard, just like their mother." "Girls?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, both beautiful, both safe." Tears slid down Lucy's face. "I want to see them." "Soon." He kissed her forehead. "You need to rest first." "The company, Victoria." "Doesn't matter." Sebastian stroked her hair. "None of it matters." A soft knock interrupted them. Alexandra stood in the doorway, her usual corporate polish somewhat disheveled. "I'm sorry, but this can't wait. The FBI is downstairs. They have a warrant." Sebastian straightened, still holding Lucy's hand. "Whatever they need." "Sebastian," Alexandra hesitated. Charles Reed is with them. He's offering the same deal, control of the company in exchange for dropping everything. All you have to do is sign. No. The voice came from Lucy, weak but determined. You won't give up your life's work because of me. Sebastian turned back to her, his expression soft. You and our daughters are my life's work now. Everything else is just details. Mrs. Reed is here as well, Alexandra added quietly. She's prepared to make a statement to the press about your reconciliation. Lucy's hand tightened on Sebastian's. He looked down at their intertwined fingers, remembering every moment that had led them here. That first night in the ER, the rooftop garden, their perfect dinner at Vincenzo's, every ultrasound and quiet, morning and shared dream of their future. Send them up, he said finally. Sebastian, no. Lucy started to protest. Trust me, he kissed her softly. I know what I'm doing. Minutes later, the room filled with people, FBI agents, Charles Reed looking smugly victorious, and Victoria, elegant as ever in designer black. She took in the scene with calculated disdain. Lucy in the hospital bed, Sebastian standing protectively beside her. Ready to be reasonable? Charles Reed asked. Sebastian's answer was to pull out his phone and dial a number on speaker. Alexandra, are you ready? Live feed connecting now to all major financial networks. He turned to face Victoria and her father. Before you say anything, you should know this conversation is being broadcast live to every business news channel and financial website. Our entire industry is watching. Charles Reed's smile faltered. What are you doing? Something I should have done months ago. Sebastian's voice was clear and strong. I'm choosing love over fear, truth over power, the kind of success that matters over the kind that destroys. Think carefully, Victoria warned. Once you do this, there's no going back. I know. Sebastian squeezed Lucy's hand. That's the point. He faced the FBI agents directly. I have evidence that Charles and Victoria Reed orchestrated a complex fraud scheme to destroy Carter Industries. Fabricated documents, falsified evidence, manipulated witnesses. My legal team has already forwarded everything to your offices. You'll find it very comprehensive. Victoria's face went white. You're lying. No. Sebastian's smile was cold. I learned from the best, remember? While you were planting fake evidence of my crimes, I was gathering real evidence of yours. Every meeting, every forged document, every bribe. Did you really think I'd let you destroy everything I built without a backup plan? You'll destroy yourself too, Charles Reed sputtered. The company will survive because, unlike you, I actually built something real. Something based on innovation and hard work, not manipulation and fear. Sebastian turned to the FBI agents. I believe you'll find everything you need to pursue charges. My team will cooperate fully. The next few minutes were a blur of activity as Victoria and her father were escorted out, their protests fading down the hallway. Alexandra's voice came through the phone. Stocks already rallying. The market loves a redemption story. Keep me updated, Sebastian said, but not for the next few hours. I have more important things to focus on. When they were finally alone again, Lucy looked at him with wonder. You knew all along? I suspected Victoria would try something like this eventually. I've been gathering evidence since the day she first reappeared. He sat carefully on the edge of her bed. But I didn't know what really mattered until I met you, until I realized there are more important things than winning. Like what? Like love, family, the kind of success you can't measure in stock prices. He smiled softly. Want to meet our daughters? Hours later, in the quiet of the NICU, Lucy sat in a wheelchair between the incubators, one hand touching each one. Sebastian stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders, both of them watching their tiny fighters grow stronger by the hour. They need names, Lucy said softly. Sebastian knelt beside her. The ones we chose. Hope and Grace, Lucy smiled. Even more fitting now. Hope and Grace Carter. Sebastian tested the names, watching his daughters respond to his voice. Perfect. Outside the window, dawn was breaking over Manhattan. Somewhere in the city, Victoria and her father were facing the consequences of their actions. The business world was buzzing with the latest drama at Carter Industries. But here, in this quiet room, none of that mattered. "I never thought I'd have this," Sebastian admitted quietly. "The kind of love that makes you better, stronger, the kind that builds instead of destroys." Lucy leaned back against him, watching Hope and Grace sleep peacefully in their incubators. That's the thing about love. Sometimes it comes in unexpected ways, through emergency room visits and complicated pregnancies and corporate takeover attempts, through doctors who aren't impressed by billionaires, through men who learn that real strength isn't in what you can control, but in what you're willing to risk for love. Sebastian kissed her temple, his arms encircling her carefully. Beyond the window, the city was waking up to a new day. Headlines would tell the story of how Sebastian Carter had outmaneuvered his enemies, saved his company, chose love over power. But the real story was here, in this quiet room, where four hearts beat in a rhythm of hope and grace and possibilities. "Ready to build something new?" Lucy asked softly. Sebastian looked at his daughters, at the woman who had changed everything, at the future stretching bright and uncertain before them. "With you, always." And in that moment, surrounded by beeping monitors and dawn light and the pure love of new beginnings, Sebastian Carter finally understood what true success meant. It wasn't in stock prices or corporate takeovers or carefully controlled empires. It was in tiny fingers curling around his own, in Lucy's smile as she watched their daughters grow stronger, in the family they were building, the love they had found, and the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The empire he had built might have been impressive, but this was what love built, and it was more powerful than anything he had ever created before. The end. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.